You're listening to the ProgAxia Podcast.
Hi everybody, it's Andy here and I've got Paul and we've got our guest today, which is Russ Wilson. Hi Russ.
Hello.
This is going to be a good one because Russ is a drummer.
By the way, I'm back to front on my picture. So
no, you're the right way around. Read what it says. If you read what it says behind you, it says invest in musicians, and that's absolutely true.
Yes.
And it's the right way around. So this is the first time you've been the right way around. That's fantastic.
Excellent.
So you're not the wrong way around, you're the right way around. You've always been the wrong way around.
Okay. I'm only a drummer, you know. So
there is an excuse there. I'm only a drummer as well, so there, you know, I know exactly what you're talking about. Anyway, listen, we've got to talk about some fantastic music today. We're gonna be talking about this little album here.
Yeah, I've got it.
Which is Fragile, the band Fragile.
You all got it.
And the album is Golden Fragments. And Paul, well, you sent this over to me, put through Paul's direction, I guess is the best way of saying. Send him a CD. I listened to this and I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. I really didn't know what to expect because Fragile are probably one of the premier Yes tribute bands, and consequently, I was thinking this is going to sound exactly like Yes. It doesn't. It's absolutely brilliant, but it's very, very original. I love it. Claire Hamill on vocals. You know, it's just a really, really, really cool album. And I've got to say, as most people know now, we've got shows going out, or I got a show going out on Mixcloud most of the time. I get them all up on Mixcloud, and I'm doing right now. I'm doing the 2020, the best of 2020. Because there's loads of great albums in 2020, loads of great music in 2020 as well. And as most people know, what a lot of my shows is going out and sort of playing the 70s stuff, because 70s to me was probably really good era. But I always play new music, always like listening to music, and I've been listening to this, and it is absolutely superb. So if you're into the sort of essence of Yes, but this doesn't sound like Yes. It's Yes influences, would you say?
I would definitely say it's influenced by Yes, because, you know, all of us involved in the project have been, you know, reproducing Yes music for years. I did Fragile for about 10 years in two different lineups, and I think you can't fail but be influenced by it. You know, we all were anyway before we got involved in it, for sure. But to do something that's purely original, it's not only a challenge, but it's really nice to try and do that kind of style off your own back and try and create something new. So yeah, and the second album is starting to happen already. It's the second original Fragile album. So we started that just after Christmas. So we'll see. We're aiming for, I think Max, the keyboard player, pulls everything together. He's kind of the brains behind it, living in Germany now. He's looking at late summer release for that. So hopefully another one this year. Fingers crossed, you know, but it's all happening remotely.
Paul,
See what I like about
this album first.
In the interest of disclosure, Russ and I have known each other for a decade or two, haven't we? What I love about this is that, and this may upset some fans of Yes, but the stuff that Yes are putting out nowadays, I think they're sort of trying too hard to sound a bit like Yes, and they become almost pastiches of themselves. So I've got to say, Andy, Russ, I don't listen to Yes much nowadays. It hasn't really done much for me. So, no word of a lie, when I listened to this, I thought this was fantastic, because this is closer to the spirit of what I imagine Yes should be doing and would have been doing nowadays if that classic lineup had stayed together. So, you know, I was really blown away by this. And you know, Russ, I know that Andy was as well. So I think there's a danger sometimes if we say sort of Yes tribute band, people have got something in their heads. Yeah. And I really would recommend this. This is fresh, it's exciting, it's sort of, you know, the spirit of Yes. Now, what would Bruford or Squire have done at that moment in time in that type of track? So, heavily recommend it. If it doesn't get on the best of 2020, then we're going to have words.
It's getting on. It's actually. I mean, I've been putting it all together just recently, putting the set list together and things like that. It's the first track on the show.
Oh, that's great.
Seriously,
Well, no,
it's a really, really good album. I mean, and we've talked about this offline, Paul, and I'm not a bullshitter. I don't sort of say things just for the sake of saying things. If I don't like something, I say I don't like it. When I first put this on, you go through this like little mental thing, when it's a Yes tribute band, and and I've heard a lot of these sort of things before, and I've never really sort of got into it, But when I put the album on, when I put this on, right from probably the first 4 minutes in, I'd completely forgotten it's a Yes tribute band doing their own music. I just completely forgot about it because it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't sound like it's trying to be Yes. It sounds like a bunch of musicians with a completely original concept, putting some new music out there. And yes, you can hear some Yes influences because, well, we like Yes influences. We like Genesis influences. We like those sort of things. Well, we like prog, because we were brought up with Yes and Genesis and Gentle Giant and your favourite band, Crimson to this. This is what I think is what it's all about. And if you listen to any of the bands that are in the 2020 show, the best of progressive rock of 2020. You can hear influences from other bands. I mean, that's what we do these things for. It's one of the reasons why I'm in a band, because I can play anything I want.
So what's it like, Russ? Being a prog musician, a drummer nowadays. I know you've got those strong 70s influences, but you know prog through the decades. What's it like composing and putting out prog music nowadays in the 2020s?
Well, I was going to pick up on something that Andy just said, which was about the whole tribute band thing, because the truth is, as a prog musician, unless you were playing in Yes or a band that are that big, you're not going to make a living purely out of prog. I think that's the truth of it. So for me, I've ended up doing the tribute band thing, probably 10 years plus. I think, well, Fragile was probably the first proper decent tribute band that I got involved in, although I did a few other bits and pieces before then. And it's kind of grown into other things. And since Fragile, I've done the Book of Genesis and I've done Genesis Visible Touch. But I think the way I look at it is the tribute band stuff enables me to do the other stuff. So it enables me to pay the mortgage and carry on doing what I want to do, which is the more creative side of things. So, for example, the new album that I've done with John Hackett and Nick Fletcher, that came about during lockdown. We'll talk about that in a bit, I'm sure. But it's not easy. Prog is not an easy choice. We all love it. Those of us who are really passionate about it want to keep creating the music and want to keep supporting the bands and everything. But it's not an easy choice. And I'm sure, we're all familiar with the idea of crowdfunding, and, Marillion have done it, and Life Signs are doing it at the moment. There's a lot of bands doing that sort of thing. And the prog audience is the type of audience that will support that kind of thing. So that's great. I think that's an excellent idea. But for these bands to keep on going, I think most of us have to do other things in order to support it. John Mitchell's a good example of that. Look how many projects he's involved in, outside of the Lonely Robot thing, and he's very prolific with his work, or has been in the last probably 10 years with Frost and It Bites and what have you. But he's a guy who does multiple different things in order to survive as a musician, and predominantly a prog musician. So yeah, it's tough, well, particularly at the moment for all of us, but we're not going to stop doing it anytime soon. But the tribute band thing, I have to say, I'm a big fan of tribute bands. I've seen the Musical Box several times, and for me that was a great opportunity to see something that's really close to early Genesis, which I was too young to see. And I think it goes the same way with other bands. Certainly Genesis Visible Touch was really the last big thing that I did before lockdown, recreating the Duke tour. So many people responded about that because they'd missed it, so they could see something that was recreating a piece of prog history, and they were too young to see it. So I think there's a place for the tribute band thing. it's not as clear cut as so many people make it out to be. Which is, I hate tribute bands because they're recreating what's already been done. That's not prog. Well, that's actually not what it's for. It's nostalgia. It's to give people that feeling again. And I think there's a place for it. I really do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing it. But apart from trying to pay my mortgage.
Yeah. No, I mean, I also do love the good tribute bands out there. I mean, I think that because it does take you back to the things. I mean, I saw the musical box at the Royal Albert Hall. And I went with all my mates who are big Genesis fans and things like that. But we were too young to see Gabriel in his heyday. I like Paul and probably like yourself, Russ. I came in sort of 77. He was probably about 81. Paul, maybe something like
that. Yeah, late 70s. Yeah,
late 70s, early 80s. Yeah.
First time I saw Genesis was the Duke tour. I think it was 1980. So I was just too young to go to a gig like that before. So we kind of missed out on a lot of it, all of us.
I think it's Wind and Wuthering for me. I mean, it was. I think either Trigger the Tail or Wind and Wuthering. I think I sort of caught the end of '76 because I'm old, basically. I'm an old boy. But but Genesis with Phil Collins was my Genesis. But I got suckers out, and I listened to Nicky Horn. That famous Nicky Horn radio show, live at Rainbow, I think it was Rainbow. And I went, Earl's Court, Earl's Court, live at Earl's Court. Yeah, brilliant album.
That was my introduction to Genesis at 13 years old. Somebody lent me that album. And so as far as I was concerned, Genesis was Phil Collins on vocals.
Yeah.
Until I kind of discovered it retrospectively and went back and bought things like Genesis Live and whatever. But like you, Andy, it was the sort of Wind and Wuthering, Trick of the Tail, Seconds Out. And then after that, Duke, that kind of fascinated me. That era, and then there were 3 out of the equation, because I don't think that was a great album, more representative really of what they were capable of. It was the first album without Hackett, which was the big loss, I think, for me.
Yeah. I think for most Genesis fans, that loss of Steve Hackett out of the band really was that catalyst. It was that thing where it stopped becoming, to me, Genesis and became Genesis 2 or whatever it was. It's like the more modern version of Genesis. And there's a massive loss without Hackett, and I don't quite understand exactly what it is. But Daryl Sturman's a great guitarist. There's no doubt about it. Just doesn't have the sound. I mean, just doesn't have the sound. And even though, me and Paul were talking about, and then there were 3. I remember going to see Genesis at Milton Keynes, the 3 of the bands and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
And it was just when that album had come out, and then there were 3 albums had sort of come out. And I didn't like it because it was short songs. It wasn't what I wanted out of Genesis. Retrospectively, I have gone back and I've listened to it. Then there were 3, and it's not a bad album.
It's got some good moments, definitely.
Yeah. There's some really good stuff on there. There's some good songs on there. There's some good bits on there. But as a whole, it's not really where I wanted it to go. I think Duke was actually probably a little bit more where I think they should have been going anyway.
Definitely.
But it's a little strange, sort of this whole argument between Phil Collins and Peter Gabriel and all those sort of things.
It's not that clear cut though, is it? Because when you start to look at things like The Lamb's an amazing album, fantastic. I love it, and that was the first one after Genesis Live that I discovered, going sort of back to the old material, and I think The Lamb is brilliant. But that was kind of the creative peak for Gabriel. Really, he'd really hit his stride there, and then he was off doing things like films, wasn't he? So film scores and what have you. So he was obviously going that way, much more cinematic. But I do love that album, and there's so many good bits in that early part of the catalogue. But so many people have said to me, Collins at that time when he was singing Seconds Out sort of era, he sounds like Gabriel, and he spent so much time singing with Gabriel. They must have influenced each other, I guess, but he does have the inflections of Gabriel, definitely.
I think they were very lucky as well, having someone to come from the ranks and be able to take on that role. I don't think many other bands would have been able to do that. You know.
That's true.
How different is it for you, Russ, when you've got two Genesis tribute bands at the moment? I think you've got Visible Touch and Book of Genesis, slightly different eras, yeah?
Yeah.
How different is it for you when you're going to be pretty much recreating the same set list of other people's music, as opposed to when you're doing this stuff? I mean, it's different, but how different is it for you? How does that work for you when you're up on stage thrashing away in 13 days? Even when you should be in 4/4 like the rest of the band.
It's a good question, Paul. I think I don't find it as easy to do the Genesis thing as I did the Yes thing, and for whatever reason, there's certain drummers that you can mimic, and you can. It's like I suppose guitarists are the same. There's certain things that fall within your style, and probably the easiest thing I ever did was playing in a Led Zeppelin tribute. For whatever reason, the Bonham thing just came very naturally to me. I spent a lot of time listening to Ian Pace and Cozy Powell as a kid, and those guys, they're in that same mold, and Cozy Powell's hero was John Bonham openly, and so I think I absorbed a lot of that. So I kind of felt that style was natural to me. However, when I started doing Yes stuff with Fragile, that felt quite natural as well. Alan White's style in particular, and then also Bill Bruford I'd listened to forever, and had a drum lesson with him as well. And Bruford was a big thing for me. I studied his style a lot. But it's not just as simple as playing like the guy. You've got to look into their drum sound as well, and how they tune things, how they hit things. I remember that the drum lesson with Bill Bruford, we sat there and he made me play something, and he drew a circle on the snare drum, about as big as a 50-pence piece. And he said, now I want you to hit the drum exactly there every time. And that's how consistent he was to get that sound on the snare. And he uses a lot of rim shot, but it's, he's all about consistency and, obsessive almost. But it's a bit intimidating for a 15-year-old kid, that was. But yeah, I mean, going back to the Genesis thing, I think you've got two different ways to look at it. And there's the live angle, which is obviously Chester Thompson and has been since, Seconds Out era. And all the way through, pretty much, with a short gap for Calling All Stations, which we'll try and forget about. And so all the live stuff is in that sort of very swingy sort of Chester style, which is, going back to the whole Weather Report fusion style drumming. He's very, very smooth, great drummer, but he doesn't play anything like Phil Collins. And my reference was always Collins, because Collins was another advocate of Bonham. So Collins loved Bonham's style and was a hard hitter. Obviously physically these days he's got a few issues and can't play drums sadly anymore. But to play drums at the level that he did when he was doing Brand X and all that stuff, I saw him with Brand X, absolutely phenomenal playing. And but he really hit the drums hard. And that whole In the Air Tonight big drum sound comes from hitting the drums hard. And so I always kind of go more towards what he did on the recordings than what Chester did live. So I feel more drawn to the Collins style because of what he grew up kind of listening to, Bonham, and some of those I think he was a Heisman fan as well, but Chester is more fusion, and as much as I love playing that kind of stuff, you hear that from the Nick Fletcher album, which is quite fusion orientated. Eventually it felt natural for me to play Genesis if I went the Collins route. If I go the Chester route, that's not so much my style. It's still just as interesting to try and analyze, but you've got to kind of do what's natural. Otherwise, it's going to be forced, I think. So yeah, definitely the Collins route for me. And probably that era we were talking about, Seconds Out to Duke, there's some amazing playing on Duke and very straight ahead and big drum sounds. I think it was Rutherford who said, Duke was the first album they achieved a really good drum sound.
Yeah, it does seem a bit strange to me, because I mean I play in a band, but I play all original stuff. We play the occasional cover track every so often, a bit of UFO sometimes, just to get the audience going, But what's the difference between playing in a Yes tribute band and a Genesis tribute band? Because they are different styles. They're different approaches, I guess.
Yeah, there's a couple of albums where you can really hear what Alan White did for Yes, and one of those is Yes Songs, and the other one for me is Keys to Ascension, the first Keys to Ascension, where you can hear the influence of Alan White's drumming, which is the stadium kind of template, if you like. It pulled Yes into that kind of stadium rock environment, and you could say, okay, when they went down the route of 90125 and Owner of a Lonely Heart and all that, it was a bit too simplistic. But there's something that happened stylistically when Alan White took over the drums, and it became a bigger sounding band. And I always tried to follow what he did live with Fragile, with a bit of the Bruford influence. Steve Carney, who was the original singer with Fragile, I always used to say that I brought the best of Bruford and White together, and that was what I was trying to do, is try and marry the two, because it's the inventiveness of Bruford and the power of Alan White as he was, back in the day. But so as a difference between the two styles, I would say personally, Yes felt more natural as a style. Genesis I had to work at. And particularly some of the older stuff, when you start looking at things like Supper's Ready and Cinema Show and whatever, there's Collins has got a very natural style, and Bruford was one of the ones who kind of who said that originally. He's just a very natural drummer. He doesn't ever, in those earlier sort of recordings, he never seems like he's trying too hard, and so I think it's trying to see how those two, how do you kind of compare them? I think it's just it's wearing different hats. I eventually, what unlocked it for me was trying to play the Chester Thompson parts with the Phil Collins style. That was it. So that you've got four drummers there, haven't you? Really, you've got Thompson, Collins, Bruford, White, and you compare the two different styles. I think that's my reference point, was always look at the live stuff. That was in Yes, it was predominantly Alan White. You look at the recorded stuff, early stuff is Bruford. On the same by the same token with Genesis, look at the recorded stuff, which is Collins all the way through. Live stuff, which is Chester. So I had to do a combination of four drummers in those learning those two bands. So I think it's a different kind of style. It's fitted easier for me with Yes, but nowadays I've done so much more of the Genesis stuff than I ever did of the Yes stuff with Fragile. I've done so many more gigs. I don't know. I haven't played Yes for a while. I played Yes style with Fragile, but I'd like to go back and reapproach it with what I know now. But I don't know. Fragile hasn't played live for a number of years. The last thing we did was the 50th anniversary convention at the London Palladium. That was the last time we played together, or possibly Max's leaving for Germany party, which was few years ago, about 3 years ago, I think. So I don't know. It's a funny thing, because now I can start to listen to Yes again as a hobby. It used to be my day job, and so that's where I'm at with Genesis at the moment. Is I really listen to Genesis as a hobby. It's research now. When I'm kind of learning stuff and how to play it. They're so different, but they do get put into the same kind of category, Genesis and Yes, because I think a lot of people like them both. Yeah. But we all have our favourite eras. Talking about Yes, Going for the One was my favourite album, although I love Close to the Edge and I love the Yes album. But, that's where they kind of hit their stride for me. And that was the classic lineup, Paul, that you were saying earlier. It's Wakeman, Howe, White, Squire and Anderson. That is the classic lineup, isn't it? It's the one that everyone wants to see back together, minus Chris Squire, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. When you went in to do this, this first original Fragile album, did you take in drumming styles of not just people like White and Bruford, but did you bring in sort of the stuff you've been doing with the Genesis tribute stuff as well? So bringing in some of that Phil Collins vibe into your drumming as well. Did that affect what happened on this original album?
Yeah, well, I think with this thing, I was able to be myself a bit more. And to be honest, we had sections of this, and Max and I recorded this in chunks. But I was never not able to be myself. But I think because I played this stuff for so long, you know, I used to play along with the Yes album, you know, probably not that long after I got into Seconds Out, because Yes and Rush were the next bands that I kind of started to absorb as a young drummer, and started to try and play along with everything, not fully understanding what it was I was playing, but I was kind of getting the feel for those odd time signatures and things. I think there's a band I played with for a number of years, and we probably still would if we could ever get a gig, and it's a band called Curfew, which is a fusion band. You can't get arrested playing fusion these days. It's very, very difficult, even more difficult than prog. But it's, you know, I used to spend a lot of time listening to Weather Report and Billy Cobham and stuff like that. So I'm a big fusion fan as well. And I have to say, there's elements of what I did with that band Curfew in the Fragile stuff, and particularly this new album that we're doing. I kind of started to really relax into some of this now and really be myself. And it's a difficult thing when you're used to playing in a certain style to relax all of that and think, okay, well, forget about what Bruford would do, or what White would do, or Collins or Thompson or whoever. You know, what would I do? How would I interpret that? And I think there's an element of all of it. You know, you absorb whatever you listen to. I'd certainly, you know, listen very intently to most prog drummers that I'm listening to, and you can't help but that stuff influence you. But I think what I do is probably a combination of all of those things, you know, and everything in between that I've absorbed and played along with, you know, from the early days of, you know, jamming along to my mum's Elton John records and Beatles records. And, you know, Deep Purple is a big thing for me. First album I ever bought as a kid was a Deep Purple album. Yeah, that one.
And for the record, everybody, I have heard Russ play Burn with Deep Purple tribute band, and yeah. He cunningly mentions his mum and Elton John without referencing the fact that Elton John's mum asked for the Elton band you're in to play at her big celebration, didn't she?
Oh, yeah. Now we can talk about it, you see, Paul, but a few years ago, that was very taboo, that whole thing. So, yeah.
So that conversation we just had, though, so when it comes to you mentioned the Nick Fletcher, John Hackett album.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that, and you know, how does your playing style? Okay, so 2 out of 3 people on this call have got it. Okay, 2 out of 3 is bad.
I think that was a hint, Russ.
Just saying. Valentine's passed yet again. So when it comes to that album, you know, given John has played a bit with his bruv, and you know, there's some prog credentials there. So to what extent are you sort of given guidance on what they want, or is it, you know, hey, we know you've got your own cred, so you know, do as you wish, young fella.
Yeah, okay. Well, this was a long process actually. This album. So I first met John when he came and guested with the Book of Genesis at Birmingham. Goodness me, must have been around about something like April, May time, 2019. And John's a lovely chap. We had a really great gig with him. He came and played on Firth of Fifth and did the Hands of the Priestess with Bob, guitarist from Book of Genesis, and Howard playing a bit of mellotron in the background. It was fantastic. And I got to chat with John backstage, and I told him the first time I remember seeing him with his brother, when I was conscious of who he was, because I think I've seen him before. I did see the Steve Hackett band on the Please Don't Touch tour and Defector, and I saw him at Reading Rock Festival in 1981, and I distinctly remember John playing Taurus bass pedals with his hands standing up. It's just such a brilliant image. And they had Ian Mosley in the band back then, who ended up in Marillion, and it was a great band. So I was kind of like super fan with John, talking to him about that gig. I just absolutely loved it. And he said to me at the time, he said, "I really love your drumming. I'd like to do something with you in the future. And there's something coming up with my guitarist, Nick Fletcher. Would you be interested?" Yeah, absolutely. So I was in from the beginning, and they'd done a lot of writing together, Nick and John, and they started sending me stuff towards the end of the summer 2019. And then Nick and I had a chat, and Nick ended up taking over the album as his own. John was working on his own solo album, had a lot to do with Steve's gigs as well. So I think Nick kind of ran with the project. John was still involved from the writing side, but Nick was driving it. So when Nick and I first chatted, I said to him, you probably better listen to some of the stuff that I've done so you know what you're letting yourself in for. And he said, "Oh, no, it's all right, I've already done that." And so he'd already kind of stalked me and checked out all of the stuff I'd done with Curfew, which was very much his style. Nick absolutely. Oh yeah, Paul's mentioning Vienna Circle, which is up there somewhere, isn't it? That's when I first met Paul. I just finished doing that album with Vienna Circle, which coincidentally they live just around the corner from me. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff out there. But anyway, Nick was very well versed in what I was capable of doing, and he was kind of driving the album towards a bit of a fusion edge, fusion mixed with prog, which is perfect for me. That's, as far as I'm concerned, that's the best of both worlds. So we started the recording, and I thought Nick was going to be much more kind of involved in telling me what to play and whatever, but actually everything that I threw over to him, he liked. So I just kind of carried on being me. From my point of view, that album is probably the best example of me being me from the last few years, because everything I did was what kind of came out of being creative with the tracks he sent me, and just throwing every idea at it, and nothing came back, which was great. So I was I felt very much myself on that album. So hopefully this is the shape of things to come. Not to I'm going to stop doing tribute bands.
Well, I got this. I stuck it in the car straight away. Oh, they'll get you a copy. Come on.
We'll sort that, Paul.
It's birthday coming up.
How do you spell Amazon? I'll give him a call.
But when I first got this, do you know, I took it, stuck it in the car, and played it, and it is absolutely brilliant. It's a really, really good album, because
well produced as well.
It is. It is really, really good. The guitar playing is phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. And as you say, there's a soft machine vibe. I mean, am I getting that wrong? But is there a soft machine vibe going on here as well?
Very interesting. Now, one of the albums I remember borrowing off a friend and never giving back was the Live in Paris Soft Machine album, which was fantastic. Remember that? Yeah. Yeah. So I think, you're on the right lines there. Nick's a brilliant guitar. Very Holdsworth, actually. Yeah.
It's Holdsworth Soft Machine sort of vibe, because when I put it on, because when you told me about Nick Fletcher's album, I had a little look at what was available, and and there's a lot of acoustic stuff. I mean, Nick is more really he's done a lot of acoustic albums, hasn't he?
With John, actually, the flute and classical guitar thing, done a lot of that.
This is a maybe a little bit of a departure, a little bit different, but as soon as I put it on, the thing that hit me was, this sounds like what Soft Machine should be doing now, I thought it was just me.
You're not a fan of Theo Travis's version of Soft Machine, Andy?
I like it all, but it's like there's something about Holdsworth's Soft Machine that as soon as I heard it, very first time I ever heard it, it just blew me away, and I just couldn't stop playing it. It was one of those records. We've spoken about the records that you keep on putting back on again and again and again and again. I don't think at one part of my life there was a week that went by when I wouldn't put a Soft Machine album on. I just got so into it. And sorry, if you can hear someone squeaking in the background, it's not Coco the Clown coming into the studio. Yeah? I've got my dog here, and he's squeaking one of his toys. I think he wants attention. The very first time I heard this, when I put it in the car, put it in there, that vibe came straight over to me.
That's interesting. I'd not thought of it. I'd not thought of it. Interestingly, Paul, you mentioned Theo Travis. Theo did some work with Curfew years back. So, I worked with Theo probably, we did some gigs with him. Don't think he ever recorded with us. He did the Marlborough Jazz Festival with us going back about, I think it's probably about 98, 99, something like that. So, fantastic player.
Did you have any stories of Frick to share?
No, because I don't remember having that conversation with him, but I do remember talking to him about Japan because I'm a big Japan fan. So I was kind of having a bit of a geek moment with him about Japan. But yeah, I don't remember the Fritz stories. But he's worked with everybody now, hasn't he?
Yeah, he is. Yes.
Sorry, Andy.
This is again highly recommended. Just go out and get it because it's absolutely phenomenal. Every track on it is solid as a rock as well.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think I felt towards the end of it that I'd overdone hearing it because I'd heard so many mixes and mastering versions. You kind of get burnt out with it. But when Nick sent me the CD, I put that on and put it on in the car, and all of a sudden it just sounded fresh straight away because it sounds different to me. It sounds different to any of the mastering mixes I'd heard on MP3. I don't know what happens with the process on putting stuff onto CD, but it changes the vibe a bit. It's probably the same as going to vinyl, but it's I haven't got fed up with listening to it yet. It sounds great to me. So I'm really pretty proud of it actually. This one,
I think it should be. I think it's a phenomenal album. But I think when you record stuff, you do get burnt out with it because you hear it again and again and again and again. And what I found is that if you just have a break from it, you put that behind you, you stop recording, you're out of it, you listen to it again, and you start listening to it as if like a fan, listen to it as if it's just another album. You're not playing on it. It's not you. You're not listening to it. Have I got that snare drum in just the right place? Or,
I heard a great quote from Bill Bruford recently, not a recent interview, a few years old, but he said he can't listen to anything that he's done until 10 years has gone past, and then he'll put it on and he feels okay about it, but it's too raw for him. So there you go. Not that he's recorded anything in the last few years, and probably won't again, but, that's an interesting idea. When I listen to things from 10 years ago, I think, oh, I'm playing better today than I was back then.
Yeah, I think you start listening to the actual song rather than the part and all that sort of stuff. So, what about one thing I wanted to touch on is England, Garden Shed.
Now, I haven't got that handy, but I'm sure you haven't.
I've got the album. That album again is one of my favourites. I love it. But so what's the involvement in that?
Okay, so this came through Mike Morton of The Gift, and Mike Morton used to be the vocalist in the Book of Genesis, and Nige, the current vocalist for Book of Genesis, had a lung infection and had to step down for some gigs we did in Holland. And Mike Morton was the obvious choice to stand in debt for him. So I'd not worked with Mike before, but I knew about The Gift, and we got on really well. And Mike asked me about a project he'd been approached about by Robert Webb, and that was to relaunch and revitalise the England lineup. And I said, never heard of them. Yeah. And literally, at that point, I'd never heard of England and the Garden Shed project, which is really surprising because I like some pretty obscure prog. But it's a cult album, there's no doubt about that. And as soon as I put it on, Mike sent me MP3, said, have a listen to this, you'll love it. And immediately I thought, I can't believe I've never heard this before, it's brilliant. And, particularly things like Midnight Madness, it's just, I love that album. The whole thing, I'll put it on and I'll play it end to end. And the drumming is just so original. And I got to meet Jody, the original drummer, who had a stroke sadly about 10 years ago and can't play anymore. So he was no pressure for me at all. When I did the gig, he was standing to my left, watching everything I did. And that guy, I've heard some great stories from Robert about him. He's such a character. They were recording something, and he always played a snare drum with the snare switched off. You can kind of hear that on all of that stuff. It's a really great sort of timbali sort of vibe. And Robert said one day they were recording and he couldn't get the right sound out of the snare, and he said he went outside and he took the snare drum apart, put it back together. And I said, well, what did you do that for? He said, apparently Jody said he wanted to get some fresh air into the drum, some new air into it. And that's just so him, brilliant. But so what actually happened with that project was it was a sort of combination of England and the Gift. And actually, when it first started out, it was Robert, myself, Mike, Gabri, Dave, and a bass player called Jordan. So it's kind of three guys from the Gift. And eventually what it came down to was that Frank, the original guitarist from England, was able to get involved, and then Martin, the original bass player, who was having back surgery at the time when we first got going with this, wasn't able to stand up for the length of a gig with a bass on his back, and we had a few sessions where he gave it a try and decided that he could get involved for a couple of songs. So we did actually have three of the original members on stage, and Jody, the original drummer, to the side of the stage, kind of egging us on. So it was a great thing to be involved with. Really, really enjoyed it. We also had Andy, who's Robert's sort of keyboard tech type guy on the Mellotron. So we had two Mellotrons on stage, original Mellotrons, which was just
Wow.
that was a real bit of history. But I'd never seen one before. That was before my involvement of prog. And by the time I got to going to see bands like UK, they were all using Yamaha CS80s and things like that, and the Mellotron was kind of fading into the background. But what an incredible piece of kit. And the story about the cut down Mellotron that England
cut it in half
to make it more portable, so that
see, stories like that I love, because it's just so bloody weird,
Well, you must get Robert on one of these because he's just full of.
I'm in contact with him now, and I really do want to get him on board into this. I'd love to talk more about that album.
Yeah, he's got loads of those stories, honestly, and he'd make a very entertaining interviewee. Yeah, do it definitely.
It is a cult album. It's like a magical drop in the ocean of prog. It's quite low. Yeah, it's sort of late 70s, but my God, it's such a great album. It's such a great album, and as you say, I play it from beginning to end. And
Poison Youth is another one I love. That was just such a difficult one to get right, and try and get that drum intro and everything. And what a groove! It's like Jody was telling me he had this cymbal that was all kind of rusty, and he found that in the back of his shed or something. And he put this thing on it's like the story about Bruford with the trashy cymbal on Reg. It's something that he found in a bin, and this thing just recorded so well. And that's my favourite groove on the whole album. That is.
Yeah, it's a cracking album. Cracking album.
So if anyone's not familiar with the album, then it really, because one of the things, Prog Magazine, probably quite a few of us subscribe to Prog. Anyway, every month they do a hidden gems. There it is. And when they did this, it's probably about 12, 15 months ago, they covered this off. So they're hidden gem of the month. And sometimes you read the column and it's like, well, yeah, it's got some sort of quirky charm to it, and it's for completists, and this is a bit. But when they reviewed this one, it was just like, if you haven't heard it, it should be in your collection. I mean, it was unequivocal. You know, this is the album that you are going to love and wonder, just as Russ was saying there, why you never heard it before. So yeah,
they had a lot of bad luck, Paul. You know, that's the truth of it. You know, talking to Robert about this and Frank, you know, they were signed up, and it was kind of the tail end of prog, really. You know, so the whole new wave thing was happening, and they had a single sent out that was sent to DJs who were playing disco records, and you know, they'd end up with putting this thing on and thinking, what's that all about? You know, it was promoted in the wrong way. When the album was launched, the boss of the record company went on holiday. You know, all kinds of things went wrong for them, you know. But honestly, if that album had come out in 76, 77, you know, it would have been as big as anything, of course.
When we think about, you're still an active working prog musician, Russ. When you think about the current scene, so I mean, we've talked a bit about Yes, Crimson, etc. But when you think of the current scene, are there any particular musicians or bands from the current crop who you would sort of like highlight as being ones that we should follow? Because we are in danger sometimes of just going back to some great music we love, and there's so much of it yet to be discovered. Any you'd give any notes to at the moment?
It's interesting that, because I'm always open to new music, and you know, obviously as prog rock fans, progressive should mean, you know, something that is going to be ever changing, right? But we still kind of hark back to some of the older styles. But I'm a big fan of Haken or Harken or whatever you want to call them. I really like their stuff, in particular. You know, probably from about 5-6 years ago. They've gone a little bit heavier, but I still like what they're doing.
That's Ross Jennings and that lot, isn't it? And
yes,
I think they say Haken as in bacon, isn't that what they say?
Yeah, I think that's how it's pronounced. Yeah, but I really like what they do. I'm a big fan of Magenta, although again, more recently, I've not liked it quite as much as some of the older stuff. But let's have a think. What else? In terms of modern, you know, more sort of recent drummers, I'm always impressed by Gavin Harrison. I love his playing. I'm not so sure about the idea of Crimson with 3 drummers. I know you're a convert, Paul, but if you've got Gavin Harrison, why do you need 2 other drummers? I just don't really get that. But I'm trying to think what else I've bought recently, because I'm a long-term It Bites fan, and through that, you know, discovered John Mitchell's stuff. Lonely Robot, I really do love those albums. I think they're great, and also what he's done with Frost, I really, really like that stuff, because it's modern. It's kind of a modern take on prog, and I guess, you know, the purists might say it's not prog. I don't know. I just really like it. It's different. So, you know,
talk about something like It Bites. I mean, if you go back to the Francis Dunnery time with albums like Once Around the World,
it's their best. That's by far.
Oh man, that is so good.
Yeah. Was that mid 80s or so? 86 or so?
Sort of beginning of the 80s, wasn't it? I don't know what off the top of my head, I can't remember. But all I remember is that
I dug it out, actually, because I thought, you know, this is one that I've put on the list. There you go.
Yeah, that album is absolutely superb. And I actually thought that it was the beginning of a resurrection of proper progressive rock, you know, because that was, I mean, the I think it's like there's a whole side, you know, Once Around the World is a 20-minute track, you know, and it is brilliant, and it's got a story, it's got like it's almost, you know, it's almost film-like, you know, it's a brilliant track, you know, and it is progressive rock, 100% progressive rock. And I just thought it was like if progressive rock's going this way, then I'm going to love going down this road with them.
Exactly. And then they hit the next album, Eat Me in St. Louis, and they were a heavy rock band all of a sudden, and it all just kind of, I was one of the people who was part of the poll of they did on the website of fans, do you want to see It Bites live again, whenever this was, you know, like 12 years ago or something? And I said absolutely, and so many people voted to see the band live again, and that's when John Mitchell got involved. And they were just phenomenal. When they came back, they were just absolutely great. You miss Frank Dunnery because he was such a personality and such a great player back in the day. But John Mitchell is phenomenal as well, technically phenomenal. And he was one of the guys who used to go and see It Bites. When I saw him on the Eat Me in St. Louis tour. I think that's the only time I saw him with the old lineup. And he was in the crowd at those gigs as well. I think there's some story that John Mitchell he said I had my first kiss at an It Bites gig. So that make him a bit younger than us, but you know what I mean. It's sort of, so yeah, what a phenomenal band. And it's all gone quiet at the moment. I heard a few things recently that there is something happening, and John Mitchell and John Beck have got together to do some writing. So I'd pay for that for sure. I love them. I think they're great.
Yeah, and you've also got bands like Wobbler now, which again I think have got a very, very sort of Yes influenced sound. Yeah. To me, it does sound like they're heavily influenced by Yes. Especially in the new album.
Somebody was asking me about Pure Reason Revolution the other day. I don't know if you've heard them. That's sort of got a Floydian vibe to them, and I guess that's part of the issue, isn't it? That when we hear this stuff, we go, "Oh, that's a bit Floyd." Yeah, that's a bit. And I'm not sure if current bands want to hear that or not. I'm not sure if that's a label they wear with pride, or they're desperately trying to say we've got our own style and our own idiolect that we're trying to get out there. I don't know how they feel about that.
It's a funny thing, isn't it? Because I really like the new Marillion, the Hogarth version of Marillion. And I used to like the Fish version of Marillion, but it always sounded a bit Genesis to me. And I think the new Marillion has got something original about it, but then more of the epic stuff is sounding like Floyd to me. But you can't go and see Pink Floyd anymore, but you can go and see Marillion.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always going to happen that way. We're always going to, as if you're a progressive rock fan for any length of time, and you've gone to see things like Yes and Genesis and Floyd and all those sort of bands, any new band comes up, straight away you're going, the influence is this, or you can hear certain things in it. And it's a natural thing to do, whether they like it or not. It's a natural thing to do because everybody's got influences. So, listen, guys, we've sort of come to our time now. It's been an absolutely fantastic 50 minutes of conversation, but we do have to sort of wrap it up with the podcast now. Russ, come back and talk about other stuff as well, mate.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Yeah,
this has been absolutely brilliant.
Just ask, I'll be there.
Yeah, thanks. Paul,
no gigs to do at the moment.
Full of insight, Dr. Prog, as we call you now. And just quickly at the end of this, do you want to just sort of reiterate what you're doing, and if anybody's out there that wants to contribute?
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Andy. Yeah, I'm doing some research into why we love this stuff. So anyone who's a fan of this type of music, then get in touch and we can have a conversation and you'll contribute to this research project. It's been going about a year or so now, and it's fascinating what people are coming up with. So please, if you want to be part of it, more than welcome. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks a lot.
So if you're a big prog fan, basically get in touch with. You get in touch through the podcast and things like that, and then we'll pass them on to Paul. And he's always interested in talking to people who love prog. So,
and if your name's Nick Fletcher and you've got a CD you're willing to share out, then it'd be great to hear from you, Nick.
But guys, both the Nick Fletcher album and the Fragile album, if you can get hold of these, get hold of them because they are absolutely superb. Very, very worth listening to. Russ, thanks very much, mate. Paul, as usual.
Yeah, guys.
See you in the next podcast. See you later.
Bye.
You're listening to the ProgAxia Podcast.